Hey guys, tonight we journey back to a world where your alarm clock is the rooster, your mattress is a pile of straw, and if you're lucky, your neighbor only smells mildly like sheep dung. You're a medieval peasant, welcome to the bottom rung of the social ladder. The year? Something between 1100 and 1350, give or take a famine. You've got one tunic to your name, maybe a pair of shoes if your feet are noble, and your house is more livestock-adjacent mud pile than quaint country cottage. The roof? Thatched. The floor, a charming blend of compacted dirt and, let's be honest, yesterday's barn waste. Cozy. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing this sleepy little community from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up in a one-room hut you share with your entire family, and possibly a chicken or two. Walls are wattle and daub. Think sticks, mud, and dreams. If you're lucky, there's a small window with no glass, just a wooden shutter to keep the rain out and the smell in. The good news? There's fresh air. The bad news? It's usually coming straight through the walls. Your bed is stuffed with hay, your blanket also hay, and probably a flea or 12. You scratch your leg, wonder if that bump is from a bite or some new medieval disease. Spoiler, both. And you start your day. You've got one set of clothes. It's made of wool, it's itchy, and it smells like every day you've ever had since harvest. Washing it means being naked for the afternoon. So, no. You wipe it off in the river sometimes and hope nobody's upstream tanning leather again. Shoes? Optional. Leather's expensive. You might have wooden clogs if you're fancy, but mostly you walk barefoot, dodging dung and sharp rocks with a kind of seasoned resignation. After a few years, your soles are tougher than the Lord's roast beef. Now, your home, technically your Lord's property, is built by your hands and your neighbors. You owe him labor, which means working not just on your own tiny strip of land, but also on his massive estate. When you build your hut, the village helps you out. It's a community thing, because if you try to do it alone, you'll freeze before you finish the walls. There's no chimney, so the smoke from your fire just floats around like an angry ghost looking for your lungs. You squat by the hearth to cook something thin and mostly made of oats while blinking through tears. The fire gives you heat, light, and constant sinus congestion. Here's a fun little historical tidbit. Many peasants smeared animal dung on their walls to fill in the cracks and keep the cold out. Yep, dung as insulation. Say what you want about medieval interior design, it's fragrant. Historians still argue whether the communal aspect of peasant villages made life more bearable or just gave disease a cozier place to spread. On one hand, everybody helps out. On the other, one guy gets smallpox and suddenly everyone's sneezing into their turnips. Now let's talk about your daily checklist. Survive the elements. Survive the Lord. Survive the Black Death. Check back later. Don't break your leg. There's no hospital, and your local healer thinks pus is a sign the devil's leaving your body. Despite the grime and gloom, you find your moments of calm. Maybe it's the soft cooing of the doves nesting in the rafters. You let them stay. They poop less than your cousin. Maybe it's the sunrise over the fields, painting the mud with gold for a few seconds before reality kicks in again. Or maybe it's the rare night when the wind isn't howling through the walls and the fleas have the decency to let you sleep through till morning. Life is brutal, but it's life. And it's yours. And tomorrow, you'll wake up in the same tunic, step onto the same dung-packed floor, and do it all again. Because there's no such thing as a day off when you're just trying to exist. Breakfast, if you can call it that, isn't exactly Instagram-worthy. You hunch over a wooden bowl of gruel that looks suspiciously like the slurry your pig eats. It's mostly oats, sometimes barley, and on good days, flavored with a pinch of salt or, if someone's feeling fancy, a slice of onion. No sugar, no spice, and definitely no almond milk. The concept of brunch hasn't been invented yet, and even if it had, your local tavern's idea of a mimosa is ale watered down with yesterday's rain. You chew slowly, not because you're savoring the taste, but because your teeth hurt, and your stomach hasn't quite decided if this is food or punishment. Tooth decay is basically a medieval rite of passage. You grind grain by hand, often with stone bits getting into the mix, so your bread doubles as dental sandpaper. Food's never a guarantee. Harvests are like medieval Tinder matches, unpredictable and often disappointing. One rainy season can wipe out half your crop. Too dry, same result. Too many locusts, say goodbye to dinner. And then there's always the risk of your lord borrowing your stored grain for some important campaign like building a second wine cellar or funding his next completely unnecessary war. Most peasants eat 2 meals a day, one in the morning and one at night. Lunch is for the nobility and people who don't have to till 10 acres before sunset. Your evening feast is more gruel, maybe with a scrap of salted meat if your pig died recently. You thank the heavens if there's cabbage or leeks, but half the time you're pretending boiled weeds are soup. Hey, they're green, right? For protein, you're usually out of luck. Eggs, you sell those to pay taxes. Milk, the cow belongs to the manor. Meat, only if something dies and you get to it before the dog does. And no, you don't eat the dog, unless times get really bad. Even then, there's probably a line. Now remember that bread we mentioned? It's called maslin, and it's made of whatever's around. Rye, barley, wheat, possibly some dust and bits of apron thread. Historians still argue whether this mix was a clever survival tactic or just evidence that peasants had zero say in what they were eating. Oh, and here's your quirky fact for the evening. Some folks in lean times stretched flour by mixing it with ground-up tree bark. Yes, bark. You too can dine like a squirrel if starvation comes knocking. Food preservation's a constant struggle. No fridges, obviously. You dry, salt, or smoke anything remotely edible if you have the resources. Otherwise, your pantry is just a wooden box in the coldest part of the hut, filled with jars of pickled disappointment. Mold is a condiment. Spoilage is a gamble. If you're wondering about famine, don't worry, it's on the calendar. Every peasant dreads the hungry gap, that bleak time between winter's end and spring's harvest, when food stores run out and nothing's grown yet. You stretch your rations, you chew slower, you hope the neighbors aren't thinking about bark soup again. But through it all, there's a strange rhythm to peasant meals. Eating with your hands, sharing bowls with family. Slurping in silence while the fire crackles. You develop a sixth sense for edible versus this might kill me, and thank the stars when a neighbor trades you a carrot for a story. And still, somehow, you survive. You wipe your mouth with the back of your hand, scrape the bowl clean, and step outside into the fields. Because that's your next meal walking away if you don't chase it. The fields don't care. You can pray. You can plant. You can even spread manure with your bare hands while whispering sweet nothings to the barley. But the crops? Indifferent. They sprout or they don't. Rain floods the furrows, sun bakes the soil, wind flattens your hard work, and sometimes it all happens in the same week. Welcome to Agriculture, Medieval Edition. You shuffle into the field at dawn with a wooden hoe that's seen better centuries. Your back already aches, and you haven't even bent over yet. The land you work isn't truly yours. It belongs to the Lord, the church, or some distant noble who's never touched mud in his life, but has very strong opinions on how your furrows should look. Half your time is spent working your tiny, pitiful plot. The other half is corvée labor, those unpaid work days on the Lord's land. You sow, reap, and stack his grain before you even touch yours. And don't forget, if there's a festival, war, or noble wedding, you're probably roped into hauling firewood or polishing armor, with your face. So why farm at all? Because you don't have a choice. You're born into this role. It's not a job, it's your entire identity. You're a peasant, a villain if we're being technical. That means legally tied to the land. You can't leave without permission. You can't sell your plot. You can barely sneeze without owing someone a chicken. Still, you scratch the earth. You plant barley in spring, oats in summer, rye in the fall. Wheat if you're blessed. Turnips if you're desperate. You rotate fields with a 3-field system, leaving one to rest every year. Historians still argue whether this method was genius sustainability or just a happy accident born from pure exhaustion. Plowing's the worst. If you have an ox, you're the village rock star. If not, you're dragging a wooden plow behind your neighbor's half-blind donkey who thinks straight line is a personal attack. The soil's heavy, the tools are dull, and your hands are blistered within an hour. Then come the pests. Rabbits, birds, insects, more birds. Your scarecrow is just a stick wearing your second worst tunic, and honestly, the crows think it's adorable. They perch on it and discuss strategy. There's even one that caws at you like it knows your debts. And let's not forget the church, which shows up at harvest to collect the tithe, a tenth of your grain, right off the top. Thank you very much. You can't eat it, can't trade it, can't cry into it. God needs it. Or more accurately, the priest with suspiciously soft hands needs it. When the harvest finally comes, it's a flurry of scythes, sweat, and praying no one gets trampled. You pile sheaves by hand, stack them in carts, and rush to get it all stored before the rain comes back. Sometimes the Lord's men take more than agreed. Sometimes mold takes the rest. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some villages, peasants used singing to synchronize their harvesting, because working to the rhythm of a tune made the back-breaking labor just slightly less soul-crushing. Plus, it drowned out the screaming of your lumbar spine. And despite everything, despite the aching muscles, the sunburns, the blisters that pop and refill like sad balloons, you feel a weird satisfaction seeing the fields full. It's fleeting, but it's real. That night, your arms tremble when you lift your bowl. You track dirt into bed. You dream of rainstorms that never stop or fields that burst into flames. You wonder what the land will do next. Because the truth is, it doesn't care about you. But you keep planting anyway. You wipe the sweat off your brow and squint at the manor looming in the distance. The way it always does. Just a little too grand, a little too smug, and always on the highest hill, like it's looking down at you and saying, "Don't forget who owns your soul." Welcome to feudalism, the medieval version of a landlord, taxman, HR department, and mafia boss all rolled into one gloriously bearded noble. You don't really own anything. Your house, your fields, your tools all technically belong to your lord. Even your existence is kind of on lease. He offers you protection, justice, and land use, and in return, you owe him everything short of your firstborn child. Unless he's running low on squires, then yes, that too. Your title? Serf. It sounds humble, maybe even a little quaint. In reality, it's a legal status that locks you into permanent peasant mode. You can't leave the village. You can't marry without permission. You can't even sell your pig without letting Lord I Have a Falcon know about it. You work his land, called the demesne, several days a week, plus your own if you have time. Spoiler, you don't. You pay rent in kind, grain, eggs, chickens, or labor. And if there's war, a wedding, or he just feels spicy, he'll demand more. He has a habit of inventing new taxes. Want to use the village mill? That's a fee. Want to bake in the Lord's oven? Fee. Want to fish in the river? Hope you brought coin, or a very good excuse. Historians still argue whether the feudal system was efficient governance or just a pyramid scheme with chainmail. On paper, it's a grand structure of mutual obligation. In reality, it often feels like you're playing a rigged board game where the dice are loaded and someone keeps moving your wheat tokens. And justice? Ha! Disputes are handled in the manorial court, presided over by, you guessed it, the lord or his steward. You say your neighbor stole your chicken, but he says it walked into his yard voluntarily. The Lord rules in his favor because that neighbor brews excellent ale. Welcome to peasant court. Here's a fun fringe tidbit. Some lords had the right of gallows on their estate, meaning they could execute serfs on sight. Imagine your landlord owning his own gallows, and you'll get a sense of how cozy the relationship was. Sometimes it's not just the lord. You also answer to the church. They've got their own rules, courts, taxes, and land, and sometimes more power than your actual ruler. If the bishop says jump, the Lord asks how high, while tithing 10% of your onions. But don't get it twisted. There are gradations even among peasants. Cottars, bordars, villains, free peasants. It's a social ladder made entirely of rickety wooden planks. The freemen pay rent but have more autonomy. You, a villain, pay rent and get told what to do. Cottars might not even have land. They just do odd jobs and hope the winter isn't too mean this year. Despite the oppression, rebellion's not an everyday fantasy. Why? Because it's suicide. The Lord has armored men. You have a shovel and a bad back. Plus, if you're seen as unruly, your whole family suffers. Bread disappears, livestock vanishes, your hut gets accidentally set on fire. Still, some peasants find clever ways to bend the rules. You accidentally fish at night. You underreport your harvest. You tell the steward that your goat gave birth to one kid, not three. It's not resistance exactly, it's survival by loophole. And when the Lord rides by on his horse, robes flapping, falcon perched like a smug accessory, you bow deep, not out of love, but because he holds your fate in his ring-clad fingers and he knows it. So you nod, smile, and get back to digging. The Lord gets richer. The system stays the same. But you? You endure it. Like the mud, like the weather, like everything else. The church bell rings. Not just once, not just to mark the hour, but in that long, solemn way that sends a shiver down your spine. It's Sunday, which means you'll wear your good tunic, aka the one with only 2 holes, and trudge your muddy boots toward the stone chapel you helped build but definitely don't own. God's house, they say. But somehow the priest lives in it. Religion isn't just part of your life, it is your life. Every season, every illness, every crop failure has a prayer, a saint, and a sermon. The church tells you when to feast, when to fast, when to feel guilty, and when to feel extra guilty. And you obey, because that's what keeps your soul from roasting like a chicken in hell. The priest is usually the only literate man in the village. He stands at the altar in his robes, speaking Latin, because of course it's in Latin, even though no one in the pews understands a word. You nod along anyway, because disagreeing with the priest is like arguing with the weather, pointless and liable to get you smacked. And yet, there's comfort in the ritual. The flickering candles, the smell of incense, the sound of voices rising together in chant. You kneel on cold stone floors and whisper prayers for a good harvest, for your sick mother, for forgiveness for that thing you did with your neighbor's goat. You really thought it was yours, okay? Tithes are mandatory, of course. 10% of your produce, right into the church's granary. And don't even think about skipping it. Father Godfrey knows exactly how many onions you harvested this year. It's like he has a 6th sense for vegetables and sin. Historians still argue whether the church was a stabilizing force for peasants or just another burden wrapped in incense and velvet. Sure, the monastery might offer alms during famine, and yes, a nun might stitch your wound with decent skill, but the church also keeps you afraid. Afraid of the devil, afraid of your own thoughts, afraid that stepping on a snail might land you in purgatory with the gamblers and bad musicians. Here's your quirky tidbit. One widespread belief held that sneezing expelled demons, which is why people were so quick to say, "God bless you." Not just polite, it was a full-on emergency exorcism. Religion governs everything. When you can marry, what you can eat, buy meat during Lent, what days are holy, and what to do if you accidentally marry your 3rd cousin. Which, let's be honest, happens more than anyone wants to admit in a village of 60 people. And then there's the fear. Eternal hellfire isn't a metaphor, it's very real in your mind. You've seen the doom paintings on the church wall, demons poking sinners with pitchforks, people boiling in cauldrons for lying, or for not fasting properly, or for, well, just being peasants, basically. Confession is supposed to help, but let's be honest, it's mostly about convincing Father Godfrey that your sins are minor, like stealing bread versus stealing a goose. He'll give you penance, say 10 Hail Marys, and maybe walk barefoot in the snow for an afternoon, just to really drive the point home. Still, religion gives you structure in the chaos. You don't know why the baby died. You don't know why your neighbor's field grows while yours withers. But God knows. The saints know. There's a reason, even if it's invisible and wrapped in suffering. You clutch your wooden rosary. You kiss the carved crucifix hanging on the wall. You mumble your prayers and light a candle for your sick cousin. The church is the one place where you feel like someone's listening, even if it's just a statue with very understanding eyes. Then the bells ring again. Mass is over. You shuffle out with the others, blinking into the daylight, squinting at the sky to see if God heard you this time. There's work to do. Always work. But at least for one morning, you were reminded there's something bigger than lords and crops and fleas. Of course, that something also demands your chickens. There's a strange silence in the village today. Not the peaceful kind. No, this one feels thick, like the air forgot how to move. No bird song, no hammering, no gossip at the well, just coughing. And then the bells. Word came from the next town over. People dying in the streets, covered in boils, bleeding from places you definitely don't want to bleed from. They say it's God's punishment, or a poisoned wind, or maybe the Jews, the lepers, the cats. It changes depending on who's yelling loudest in the square. But deep down, you know, something is wrong. This isn't a bad harvest. This isn't a fever. This is the Black Death. You've never heard of Yersinia pestis, the flea-borne bacterium hitching a ride on rats across Europe. All you know is that your cousin was fine yesterday, and today he looks like someone beat him with a sack of bruises. His neck is swollen, his armpits are black lumps, and he's burning hot but shaking like a leaf. The village priest comes to bless him. By nightfall, both are dead. Panic doesn't spread, it erupts. People flee. Whole families vanish into the woods or barricade their huts and refuse to come out. Some dig graves in advance. Others don't bother. You pray, harder than you ever have. But the church doors are closed. Father Godfrey hasn't been seen in 2 days. There's a rumor he died mid-sermon, and the altar boy ran screaming out the front door. You tie herbs around your neck. Sage, rosemary, garlic, anything to purify the air. You burn incense. You chew bitter roots. You avoid eye contact with strangers and keep your mouth covered with a scrap of wool soaked in vinegar. It smells awful, but hey, you smell awful already. Historians still argue whether medieval containment efforts, like quarantine or burning clothes, actually worked or were just desperate superstition. Some cities did better, mass graves by the hundreds. Entire towns wiped clean. Here's your fringe tidbit. Some people joined the flagellants, religious zealots who marched from village to village, whipping themselves to atone for everyone's sins. You watch them pass through, bloodied backs glistening under their rags, chanting Latin like they're trying to beat the plague out of existence. It's terrifying and weirdly hopeful. You bury your neighbor, no priest, no rites, just you, a shovel, and a few whispered words. You try not to look at the body too long or breathe too close. Inside your home, your family huddles. Food runs low because no one dares trade. The fields go untended. The animals wander loose, mooing in confusion. Deaths become part of the background. You hear coughing through the walls at night and pretend it's the wind. And then, quiet. Weeks pass. Then months. The fever stops taking people. Smoke still rises from a few hearths. The well is used again. Life, in its stubborn way, trickles back. You step outside one morning and realize you're still here. 1/3 of your village isn't. Neither is the baker, the midwife, or the boy who used to carve whistles from sticks. But you made it. And while no one says it out loud, everyone knows things have changed. There are fewer mouths, fewer hands, and fewer people to bow to the Lord. Wages are whispered about. Land suddenly sits empty. A new world might be creeping in, slowly through the ashes. But for now, you survive. You wash your face in the river. You light a candle for the dead. And you whisper a quiet thank you to the garlic clove still dangling around your neck like a smelly little miracle. You're sick, again. Not plague sick, thank the saints, but sick in the regular, miserable, snot-drenched, can't-lift-a-bucket kind of way. Your joints ache, your back burns. You've been coughing so hard the chickens are starting to look concerned, so naturally you go to the doctor. Except you don't, because there probably isn't one. If your village is like most, you rely on a mix of superstition, herbal remedies, and your grandmother's firm belief that boiled nettles can cure literally anything. There might be a barber surgeon in the next town over. Yes, the same guy who cuts hair and extracts teeth, but seeing him costs money, and you spent your last 3 pennies on turnips and a candle. So you call for the wise woman. Every village has one. She knows which roots to chew, which flowers to crush, and which saints to pray to when your liver starts making weird, gurgling noises. She smells like damp moss and answers questions with riddles, but she once brought a stillborn calf back to life, so you trust her. She arrives with a basket full of mysteries, dried frogs, vinegar-soaked cloths, and something that might be powdered bat. She wraps your chest in mustard leaves, makes you drink something so bitter your eyes water, and places a charm under your pillow that's supposed to banish fever demons. You ask if it works. She just nods and says, "It's worked before." Historians still argue whether these folk remedies were completely useless or preserved ancient medicinal knowledge that modern science is just now rediscovering. Turns out, some of those herbs do have real effects. Others, not so much. Here's your quirky tidbit. One popular remedy for illness involved wearing a dead weasel around your neck. whole. No one's sure why. Maybe it was the smell that scared the disease away, or everyone else, which was close enough. If you're desperate, and many are, you might try bloodletting. A barber uses a rusty blade to open a vein and let your illness drain out. You get lightheaded, dizzy, and sometimes die. But hey, at least your humors are balanced. Or maybe you try leeches. Yes, actual worms that suck your blood. You lie there as they squirm on your skin, latched on like tiny vampires with no dental plan. The theory? Too much blood equals too much illness. So naturally, removing the blood fixes it. Genius, right? And then there's the church's approach: confession, fasting, prayer, and maybe a pilgrimage if you're not too dead to walk. Some monasteries offer basic care. A monk with shaky hands and a lot of faith might stitch your wound or set a bone, but often it's a coin toss between healing and, well, early judgment day. If you're lucky, you survive the fever with your limbs intact and a new appreciation for breathing through both nostrils. If not, you either die quietly or become that coughing guy, muttering near the well and warning kids not to stand too close. Illness is part of your world. It creeps in like fog and settles into your bones. There's no germ theory, no concept of sanitation, and definitely no take two and rest. You push through or you don't. But somehow your body, that overworked, underfed, mud-caked miracle, keeps going. You rest when you can. You sip the bitter brew. You light a candle. And you pray that next time, it's just a cough and not something worse. The frost hasn't melted from the ground, and already your stomach is making deals your dignity can't cash. It's the hungry season, that cruel little window between winter's end and spring's first harvest, when your food stores are down to a few shriveled onions, some questionable grains, and maybe a wheel of cheese that started developing sentience. This part of the year has a name: the famine months. But among peasants, it's just called normal. You patch your tunic again. You boil the same roots 3 times. You chew slowly and pretend your jaw's just tired, not that there's nothing left to eat. The worst years are the ones where the harvest fails completely. Too much rain? Rot. Not enough? Drought. A freak hailstorm in July? Good luck with your wheat-flavored sadness soup. And when the crops fail, the panic spreads like fire through dry thatch. You stretch what's left. Thin porridge, half-baked bread. You eat weeds, sometimes bark. That's not a metaphor. You've seen neighbors grind up tree bark to mix with flour. It tastes like regret and splinters. But it fills space in your stomach, and sometimes that's enough. Historians still argue whether these recurring famines were due more to environmental factors or to the deep structural flaws of feudal agriculture. Small plots, poor storage, and zero incentive for improvement unless your lord has a sudden philanthropic streak. Spoiler, he doesn't. Here's your quirky tidbit. In parts of Europe, people used to bleed bread. Not a ritual, just soaking stale loaves in water until they were edible again, then rebaking them into a sad pancake that somehow made hunger feel even more tragic. During the worst years, like 1315 to 1317, the Great Famine, people reportedly ate anything: cats, dogs, dead horses. There are even whispered tales of less savory meals. You don't ask. You definitely don't look into it. You just keep your fire burning and pray that your neighbors aren't eyeing your youngest like a particularly plump turnip. The church, in these times, preaches patience. Suffering is purification, they say. Your empty belly is an offering to God. You'd rather offer something else, frankly, like your Lord's absurd wine tax, but the heavens don't take suggestions. Trade slows to a crawl. No surplus means no barter. The butcher's stall is empty. The tavern waters down the ale. Even the rats are looking thinner. You dream of food, not feasts, just a real meal. Cheese that's soft, bread that's crusty, meat that doesn't require a prayer and a dental plan. You dream of apples, of honey, of roasted garlic, and you wake up to a cold hearth and a sibling coughing in their sleep. But you hold on, because you always do, because you have no other choice. Spring will come, the ground will soften, seeds will go in, and you'll start again. And when that first green shoot breaks through the mud, you'll cry. Not because it's beautiful, but because it means, just maybe, you get to survive another year. You strip down to your undertunic by the river, bracing yourself for what medieval folks like to call a nice cold rinse, and what modern people would probably classify as a health hazard. The water bites like a sarcastic ghost. You don't scream. Much. Bathing isn't a daily activity. It's not even a weekly one. Cleanliness is more of a suggestion than a goal. After all, you're not royalty. You're a peasant. If you don't smell faintly of livestock, are you even working hard enough? Still, you make the effort. Because under the sweat, dirt, and hay, you're still a human being with a face you'd like to occasionally see. Soap exists, but it's harsh, mostly animal fat and ashes, and leaves your skin feeling like someone tried to exfoliate you with gravel. But it's better than nothing, and nothing is what most people use. Instead of daily baths, you rely on preventive tactics. Garlic necklaces, for example. Popular belief says they ward off sickness, evil spirits, and possibly judgmental glances. You wear one proudly, even though you're 73% sure the smell alone could repel invading armies. There's also the ritual of fumigation, burning herbs or straw in your home to cleanse the air. In reality, you're just hotboxing yourself with smoke and hoping whatever's making you sneeze gives up and moves to the neighbor's hut. And of course, there's vinegar. It's your go-to cure, cleanser, mouthwash, and sometimes aftershave. You dab it behind your ears like a peasant perfume, and if it stings, well, that means it's working, right? Historians still argue whether medieval people were truly as filthy as the stereotypes suggest. Some argue they bathed more than we give them credit for. Communal bathhouses existed in towns, and people did try to stay clean. Others point out the widespread lice, fleas, and unfortunate odors. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some regions, people believed that washing too often opened your pores and made you vulnerable to illness. So the dirtiest guy in town? He might just be a health guru by 14th century standards. Hygiene is also seasonal. Summer baths are more common, rivers aren't frozen, and sweat makes things unbearable. Winter? You scrape off the grime with a rough cloth, change into slightly less filthy clothes, and call it a glow-up. And speaking of clothes, laundry day is a public event. You and the other villagers gather at the stream, beating garments against rocks, scrubbing with sand, laughing, gossiping, and sneakily judging whose tunic has the most mysterious stains. You don't enjoy it, but there's comfort in shared misery. Latrines, if you're lucky, are communal pits. If you're unlucky, it's a quiet corner behind the house and a prayer for a strong breeze. Chamber pots are emptied out windows with a shouted warning, "Garde à l'eau," unless someone forgets. You only make that mistake once. Yet despite all this, there's a strange pride in being alive, in enduring the muck and finding moments of clarity. The sun on your face after a wash, the feeling of clean linen, well, linen adjacent, against your skin. A brush of fresh mint leaves across your teeth when someone remembers to grow them. You don't bathe for vanity. You bathe for survival, to feel human, if only for an afternoon. And when you dry your hair in the sun and scratch less than usual, you smile, because for now you've beaten the grime. Tomorrow, of course, the dirt will return, but so will you. It's market day, and the village square is, well, not bustling, but there's at least one goat, 2 drunks, and an old woman yelling about cabbage. In your world, that counts as a party. You've put on your least patched tunic, splashed a little vinegar behind your ears, always vinegar, and walked a mile with a sack of eggs that may or may not still be eggs by the time you arrive. Because here's the thing. Joy, for a medieval peasant, is precious and fleeting. But it exists. And when it shows up, you grab it with both blistered hands and dance like no one's watching. Except they are. The whole village is watching, judging, but still. At the tavern, the ale flows, thin, warm, and slightly sour, like someone tried to ferment a puddle. But it hits the spot. You lean on a wobbly bench, listen to the fiddler scraping out something vaguely melodic, and laugh at a joke about sheep that's older than the castle walls. This is what fun looks like. Gossip, music, and mild intoxication. The village gossip is better than any bard's tale. You hear who's been stealing carrots, who's pregnant, who says she's not but absolutely is, and which monk was seen sneaking out of the tavern last Sunday. It's scandal, survival, and soap opera all rolled into one, and it keeps you sane. Then there are the festivals, few and far between, but glorious when they arrive. The Feast of Fools, the Harvest Festival, Saints' Days galore. You wear flowers on your head, dance barefoot on splintery wooden boards, and eat things you'll regret at dawn. Once a year, there might even be roasted meat, and not the kind you found dead in the woods. Historians still argue whether these celebrations were mere distractions or essential social glue. Either way, when you're spinning in a muddy circle, hands clasped with someone who smells vaguely of turnips and happiness, you're not thinking about taxes or boils or that weird sound your cow's been making. And here's your quirky tidbit. One documented festival in France featured a dancing goat contest. That's right, a trained goat dancing to music. Winner got cheese. Goat got fame. Everyone else got a story. Sometimes you sneak out to the woods with a stolen flask and your cousin's loot, pluck out a tune, and stare up at stars that feel way too close. There's no light pollution, no buzzing electricity, just the Milky Way stretched out like spilled flour across the sky. You find joy in simple things. A loaf that rose, a chicken that didn't die, a warm patch of sun on the barn roof, a nap without lice, a joke that makes your side hurt from laughing, even if it involves an indecent amount of goat references. You don't have luxuries, but you have moments, and sometimes a moment is enough. You stagger home with a full belly, a fuzz in your head, and a flower still tucked behind your ear. You'll pay for it tomorrow, head pounding, Lord calling, field waiting. But tonight, you lived. And for a peasant, that's a win. You're 16, maybe 17. No one's quite sure, least of all you. And suddenly everyone starts looking at you like a potential spouse. Not because you're particularly attractive or good at singing around the fire, but because your family has a pig, and they've been eyeing the neighbor's goats. Marriage, in your world, isn't about love. It's a transaction, a deal, a handshake sealed over ale and livestock. You might be betrothed before you can spell your own name, if you could spell it all. And when the time comes, the wedding isn't a grand affair. It's a quick ceremony outside the chapel, some bread, a bit of dancing, and then, well, then you're expected to figure out how to share a bed in a hut with 2 chickens and your grandma sleeping in the corner. Still, you try to make it sweet. You place flowers in your partner's hair, hold hands at the feast, whisper promises under your breath even if you're not quite sure what you're promising. Then come the babies. Children arrive fast and often. There's no real understanding of fertility windows or prenatal vitamins. There's just a lot of hoping, praying, and counting fingers when the midwife finally hands over the squalling bundle. And yes, a midwife, usually an older woman with a sharp tongue, a boiled cloth, and terrifying efficiency. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some regions, babies were immediately salted after birth, literally rubbed with salt. Why? To toughen them up, or to scare off evil spirits, or just because medieval parenting was a full-contact sport. But childbirth is dangerous, for the mother, for the child, for everyone in the vicinity without a strong stomach. Women often birth on straw, surrounded by village women, gripping wooden bars and biting down on sticks. There's no anesthesia, no stitches, no real plan. Just a lot of sweating, screaming, and St. Margaret prayer cards. And if the baby doesn't cry, you bury it before the priest sees. Stillbirths are common, so are infant deaths. Fever, infection, a chill breeze in the wrong direction, any of it can snatch a life before its first winter. You've got 7 kids. 3 survive. That's normal. Historians still argue whether the high birth rate was driven more by faith, lack of contraception, or the simple brutal math that came with losing nearly half your children before age 5. Maybe all 3. The survivors work early. By age 4, they're fetching water. By 6, chasing geese. By 10, helping in the fields. School? Ha! That's for monks and daydreamers. Your children are your labor force, your insurance policy, your legacy. You love them fiercely. You swat them when they misbehave, curse them when they're underfoot, and stay up nights boiling herbs when they're sick. You give them the best bite of stew, even when your own belly growls. Because in a world with so little control, they're the one thing you'll claw through the mud to protect. Marriage, babies, and loss, they're a cycle. You watch your children grow up and repeat it. And maybe, just maybe, they'll have one more pig than you did. That's the dream. You sit outside your hut, whittling a toy from a stick, listening to your youngest hum a tune you don't recognize. For a moment, the world is quiet, and for a peasant, that silence is as close to peace as it gets. It starts with a look. A neighbor frowns at you after her cow dies suddenly. Then someone whispers about that odd herb bundle you carry. A child gets a fever, and another claims they saw you talking to your cat in the moonlight. Which, to be fair, you did, but mostly because the cat's the only creature in the village who doesn't ask for eggs. And just like that, you're a suspect, not of theft or laziness or even heresy. No, something much worse, witchcraft. In a world where bad luck is personal, someone must be to blame when the barley fails or a baby's born with a crooked foot. And since no one's going to accuse the priest or the Lord, you'll do just fine, especially if you're a woman, unmarried, aging, opinionated, or God forbid, good with herbs. Soon enough, your friends stop knocking on your door. The wise woman who once shared nettle tea with you now crosses herself when you pass. You find strange symbols scratched on your hut. The village dog, who used to nap by your fire, growls when you come near. You plead your case, but the more you talk, the worse it gets. After all, isn't silver-tongued speech one of the signs of a witch? Historians still argue whether witch hunts in the early Middle Ages were organized efforts or isolated acts of hysteria. Large-scale inquisitions don't arrive until later, but local suspicion? That's evergreen. Fear doesn't need papal approval, it just needs a bad harvest and someone to point at. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some areas, people believed witches could steal your shadow. No shadow? Clearly bewitched. One guy even tried to prove his innocence by standing in the sun and yelling, "Look, I still have one." If things escalate, the manorial court gets involved. They don't need evidence, just rumors. You might be dunked in a pond to see if you float, bad sign, or made to carry a hot iron to test your purity. You heal quickly? Guilty. You burn your hand? Also guilty. The logic isn't airtight. You might be let off with a penance, a public flogging, a fine, a forced confession. But the stain stays. People remember that label clings tighter than your tunic in a rainstorm. And even if the accusation fades, you carry it. You speak less, walk faster, keep your head down, you hide your herb pouch deeper in your cloak and stop singing to your cat, which frankly feels unfair to both of you. Still, you survive, because you know the land better than anyone. You whisper to the trees, you dry flowers in the rafters, and mutter healing charms when no one's listening. They might call you a witch, but you call yourself wise. And in the quiet moments, when the wind rustles through the fields just right and your fire crackles like it's telling secrets, you wonder, maybe they're not wrong. The messenger arrives on a skinny, wheezing horse, wearing a tabard 2 sizes too large and an attitude far too cheerful for what he's about to announce. There's a new tax. Again. This time it's to pay for the Lord's campaign in the north. Last time it was for the chapel roof. Before that, a wedding, a funeral, and once, memorably, a falcon named Cedric who got lost and needed to be replaced. You don't ask questions, you just hand over your only chicken and try not to cry. Because when the Lord wants something, you pay for it. Doesn't matter if you have it or not. If you don't, he'll take something else. Grain, tools, that new bucket you carved by hand and loved like a second child. You'd think the church would step in, but they're too busy collecting their own tithe. So you nod, swear quietly into your sleeve, and add, "Find more chickens to tomorrow's list." War makes everything worse. You don't fight in it. Peasants aren't considered useful for that, unless it's a peasant rebellion, in which case you suddenly become a high-value target. But you feed the war, fund the war, watch your sons get conscripted when the noble runs out of legitimate heirs to throw at the enemy, and war always arrives at the worst time. Harvest half done? Doesn't matter. There's a levy now. Bring your own sword, or pitchfork, or honestly, just show up and scream loudly enough to look threatening. Historians still argue whether medieval taxation systems were uniquely cruel or just a natural consequence of land-based economies run by men in pointy shoes. There were years of peace, yes, but those years always ended. And when they did, the burden fell on your aching shoulders. Here's a quirky little tidbit. In England, some peasants had to pay a chevage tax just for the right to leave their village for a better job elsewhere. Want a better wage? That'll be 3 coins, please. And also, your dignity. Back home, your wife sews a hole in your tunic for the 3rd time this month. Your oldest is working a full man's day in the field, though he's barely reached your chest. You scrape together what little you have to pay the steward when he comes knocking, and he nods without smiling. You know what happens if you fall behind. They say the king rules by divine right. You've never seen him, but you have seen his soldiers march through, demanding firewood, shelter, bread, and once a pig that had the misfortune of looking sturdy. You didn't even get a thank you. There's no complaint department, no protest march. You grumble, grit your teeth, and plow anyway. Because winter doesn't care about your politics. Your children still need soup. Sometimes, in the privacy of your own thoughts, you wonder, what if no one paid? What if the whole village said no? But then you remember the last rebellion, the burned homes, the hangings, the fields salted as punishment, and you keep your head down, because surviving isn't about winning, it's about not being noticed. Still, when the steward turns his back, you whisper a curse, quietly, just loud enough for the wind to hear. You've had enough. It starts with a mutter, then a whisper, then a low, rumbling chorus of complaints. Your neighbor's been evicted, the new tax collector's taken your only ox, and the Lord's son, who's never lifted anything heavier than a goblet, just announced another labor increase to cover castle renovations. Apparently the guest chamber needs more tapestries. This time, the village doesn't just grumble. This time, someone throws a rock. Rebellion is a dangerous word, but it spreads like fire in dry thatch. You gather at night behind the granary. Quiet voices, angry eyes. Someone has a rusted sword. Someone else, a scythe. You, a torch. It's not much, but it burns. You march. Not with drums or banners, just fury and tired feet. You march to the manor. You shout. The steward appears pale and twitchy and vanishes inside faster than you can say, "Where's my ox?" The Lord doesn't come out. He sends guards instead. Pitchforks versus armor. It goes exactly as badly as you'd expect. Rebellions don't tend to end well, especially not when the local noble has actual soldiers, horses, and a working understanding of strategy. You have passion, pebbles, and maybe a ladle. It's not a fair fight. A few get away, a few get caught. You hide in the woods for 3 nights, surviving on dried peas and regret. When you finally sneak back to the village, there's a gallows in the square, and the manor's windows are lit up like a feast is happening, which it probably is. Still, something's changed. Even a failed rebellion leaves a mark. The steward suddenly listens a little more carefully when you speak. The tax doesn't go up this season. The guards walk slower past your huts, eyes downcast. Maybe they feel guilty, or maybe they're just full of stolen cheese. Historians still argue whether these small uprisings planted the seeds of later peasant revolts, or were just flailing acts of desperation, easily crushed and quickly forgotten. But you remember, you know. Even failure feels better than silence. Here's your quirky tidbit. During the Great Rising of 1381, peasants stormed London with demands that included the end of serfdom and fairer taxes, and for a brief moment, they actually made it happen. Until the king lured their leader into a meeting and had him stabbed. That's medieval politics for you. Handshake, dagger, smile. Back in the village, you work your fields, quietly. But your posture's a little straighter. Your hands grip the plow with purpose. You whisper stories to your children, not about kings and saints, but about that one night when the people almost mattered. You lost the battle, but you gained a voice. And now, every time the Lord's men ride by, they glance a little nervously at your pitchfork. You wake up with a sore back, 2 fresh blisters, and a vague feeling that you've lived 100 years in the same 3 square miles. You have. But somehow, you're still here. The seasons pass like they always do. The barley's up, the goats are yelling at nothing, and your youngest just learned how to spit seeds farther than any of your other kids ever managed. It's a strange source of pride, but you take what you can get. Your hut leaks, your knees creak. Your tools are more patches than metal, but your hands are steady. Your bread rose this week, and the stew didn't taste like despair. Much. You've seen famine, plague, war, taxes, the occasional riot, and a neighbor who definitely turned into a goose for a week. No one talks about it, but we all remember. You've buried too many friends, brought too many children into a world that seems determined to eat them alive. And yet you rise. Every day you rise, because that's what you do. You are not rich, you are not powerful, but you are stubborn. You plant, you repair, you stretch a sack of oats into 4 meals and somehow make them all taste slightly different. You carve a flute from a reed and teach your child to whistle, even though there's nothing to whistle about. You laugh more than you cry more than you admit, you survive more than you should. And over time, something shifts. The village is smaller now. The plague changed things. The Lord's new steward is slightly less terrible. There's talk of better wages in nearby towns. Some of your neighbors have left to work as free laborers. Serfdom isn't what it used to be. Maybe, just maybe, things are changing. Historians still argue whether the centuries of peasant survival were a kind of quiet rebellion or simply endurance under pressure. You don't care. You're not a theory. You're a person. A tired, mud-covered, occasionally lice-bitten person, but a person all the same. Here's your final quirky tidbit. Archaeologists once dug up a medieval shoe that had been patched 15 times. 15. That's not footwear. That's a lifestyle. And that's you. Worn, patched, and somehow still walking. So tonight, you sit by your fire, the good one, the one that doesn't smoke too much if you stack the logs just right. You tear off a chunk of bread, sip a little ale, and feel the warmth on your face. Outside, the wind howls like it always has. But in here, for now, it's quiet. You've lived a hard life, but it's your life, and against all odds, you made it. Now, as the fire burns low and the air grows still, your thoughts begin to slow. The rough edges of the day soften, and even the ache in your knees feels like something you can carry. Outside, the stars blink in silence, distant watchers over a world that's always been hard, but somehow never quite managed to break you. You hear the creak of timber overhead, the gentle crackle of wood on the hearth, and the slow, steady breathing of those you love, curled beneath patchwork blankets, dreaming of a better harvest, a kinder season, a tomorrow where the bread rises just a little higher. The wind rustles the thatch, but it's no longer a threat. Just a sound you've lived with so long, it's almost a lullaby. The candle gutters, the shadows stretch, and your eyelids grow heavy. You've seen enough for one life, done enough, endured enough. You are not a hero in the stories, but you are the reason the stories exist. The fire fades. The cold leans in, but it won't reach you tonight. Not with your body wrapped in homespun and your spirit wrapped in something even stronger. The quiet, unyielding dignity of having endured. So sleep now, deeply. The world may not be kind, but for tonight it is still. You are safe, you are strong, and you are still here. End of script. Sweet dreams.